worker. DEMA is a Turkish and Kurdish community centre established in the late 1980s to promote cultural, economic, social and democratic rights. DEMA focuses on minority rights and aims to strengthen solidarity amongst the community and to help their integration into society. Jerin.
Hi. Firstly, I want to say that it's an honour to be addressing you both as a representative from DEMA Turkish and Kurdish Community Centre and, more importantly, as a woman from an ethnic minority community where often male voices do dominate political discussions. I have been asked to say a few words about the current disturbing, chaotic political environment in Turkey and how we can work together in the UK against the increasingly totalitarian and barbaric attacks on fundamental freedoms in Turkey. Until very recently, there was a prevailing image in the West on Turkey as a beacon of hope and as an example of what a moderate democratic Islamic government could achieve. The truth is that Turkey has never enjoyed a true democracy. Having freed itself from the shackles of the military coups and military dictatorship, Turkey is now trapped under a despotic totalitarian government. On the 1st of November, Erdogan and the AKP came out victorious with over 49% of the votes in the second general election of the year, which was held under extraordinary conditions. This was following an effective defeat in the 7th of June elections that resulted in a hung parliament. The president refused to recognize the June election results and forced the country into another election 5 months later, and by garnering 4.5 million extra votes, the AKP attained a landslide victory. What is important is that behind the success of the AKP is not a track record of laudable developments. Behind the so-called victory lies the deception of the population and the creation of fear and anxiety. All this by warmongering and by fomenting historical fault lines across ethnic and religious lines. There are unsurprisingly numerous reports by international electoral observers stating that the elections were not held fairly. It is also curious that in a country of over 74 million registered voters, all the votes were counted in under 4 hours. In the run-up to the national elections in June, the HDP brought a beacon of hope for citizens in Turkey, with a message of peace and tolerance for all. The party was able to draw enough support to surpass the undemocratic 10% threshold to take up seats in Parliament and to form an effective opposition. There was in June a renewed energy in Turkey with people feeling that they could change their destiny. However, the situation of a hung parliament and the AKP's purposeful undermining of coalition efforts, as well as its attacks on Kurdish civilians in the east and southeast of Turkey, led to a breakdown in the already delicate ceasefire between Turkey and the pro-Kurdish PKK. The continued military operations, despite the decision for inaction by Kurdish forces, demonstrate AKP and Erdogan's insistence on war, and insistence combined with the offensive against Rojava, which has been extremely successful in defeating ISIS. It was exactly in this setting that President Erdogan created an environment of fear and chaos. His aim was simple: to divide and rule, with the prime target being to eradicate political activity by opposition groups such as HDP and by attracting the nationalist votes through its hardline nationalist approach against the Kurds. His ultimate dream is to gain enough votes to change the Turkish constitution to allow him to establish an executive presidency and extend his reign. It is fair to say that Erdogan convinced the conservative supporters to support him in the false pretense of bringing stability in Turkey. The truth is, the struggle for political rights and freedoms is critical for a prosperous and stable future for Turkey. Crucially, the attacks on fundamental freedoms is only getting worse under the dictatorial regime of Erdogan. In recent months, the AKP has been censoring and taking over TV channels and newspapers, and are critical of the government, shutting down websites and online social networking sites. Moreover, they are directly intervening in the democratic will of the people by removing popularly elected mayors in Kurdish-majority areas and by preventing elected members of parliament from opposition parties to act as an effective opposition. Despite the promise of bringing stability to the country, the AKP has brought anything but that, by worsening living conditions for workers in large parts of the country are struggling with extreme poverty. What's more, the rekindling of warmongering policies has not been limited to the PKK and has never truly attempted to tackle the real threat of ISIS. Under the pretext of war on terror, the AKP has supported ISIS and its affiliates while imposing blockades on Kurdish town, curfews and air raids on Kurdish border towns where YPG fighters were and still are protecting civilians and the Turkish border from imminent ISIS expansion. Kurdish groups and political rallies by anti-war demonstrators were targeted by ISIS terrorists, resulting in the bloodiest terrorist attack Turkey has ever seen. Despite the suicide bombers having been reported to the police, there appears to be a compliancy or even complicity around the lives of those who criticize the government. In spite of all this negativity, there is a strong movement for change in Turkey, and a large number of people still gather around HDP and the pro-Kurdish, pro-peace and pro-democracy political movements. Our vision as Dema Turkish and Kurdish Community Centre is to support this struggle for a democratic and peaceful solution that meets national demands for full equality for all. We see it as our duty to support democratic forces that are mobilizing and fighting to achieve freedom and fraternity in Turkey. We know that creating a democratic country based on equality where people can live humanely can only be achieved by raising the struggle through determination and perseverance. The only way that the situation in Turkey can improve is by ceasing support to ISIS, ceasing all attacks on Kurdish people in the eastern and southeastern Turkey, ending curfews in eastern and southeastern Turkey, reinstating the freedom of the press and media, reinstating the independence of the judiciary, allowing politicians from opposition groups and opposition parties freedom to participate in political activities and in parliamentary affairs without hindrance and intervention, ending police brutality against peaceful democratic protests, and recognizing and respecting religious plurality. You may ask what Dema's role is as a Turkish and Kurdish community living in Britain. Our response to this is very simple. Our job and objective has always been to merge struggles through solidarity to make them stronger. We have, through our brothers and sisters in the trade unions, political parties and progressive forces, always aimed to show the public in the UK social, economic and political actualities in Turkey. Hence, being here today and speaking at such an important meeting is a perfect demonstration of this. We have, through our links awareness, put pressure on Turkish governments, but more importantly, called for solidarity during crucial times. Despite being established by the Turkish and Kurdish workers here in the UK, Dema is no longer identified as a migrant organisation. Its objectives of building bridges between the Turkish, Kurdish workers and native workers is one it likes to build further in helping the struggle in the UK grow. Finally, I was also asked to say a bit about the workers in the UK and what we could do to help. I think the first thing that is worth echoing is the call from Jeremy Corbyn. We are supportive of Jeremy Corbyn's call for economic sanctions against banks and countries that are funding ISIS. This is a concrete step which would have immense positive impact on the ground and makes it even more vital when Turkey's relations with ISIS are well known. Other than this, the best thing you can do is to get him involved and help us be heard by those in power in Turkey and in the UK. We would also like to remind you that the Paris, Beirut and Ankara attacks have been made possible by Turkey's tacit support of ISIS, and we must expose those who have made the world less safe and use all means to stop terrorists being protected by our so-called allies. Please join our campaigns and continue to work with us in our call for democracy in Turkey, and we urge you to show solidarity with the people of Turkey. I just also want to make a note that my friends will be doing a collection for the victims of the Ankara bombings who have been injured and paralysed and have lost their limbs. Most of the injured victims have been removed from hospitals because they were unable to pay their hospital bills, and the Turkish state has not been supportive in this sense, and we would appreciate your generosity, so thank you.